Hi, this is Bob.
And this is Cheryl.
Welcome to Digging Deeper, brought to you by California Unearthed. And we are going to be doing a pretty cool episode today.
I'm actually excited because I have no idea what we're going to be talking about, which I actually asked Robert not to tell me what we're going to do on, so.
I grew up in Southern California, and we grew up going to Knott's Berry Farm more than we did Disneyland. And so Knott's Berry Farm was a family staple for us. And I think it was like in the 80s, it was under $20 to get in, if I remember correctly.
That's not too bad.
No. And even today, Knott's Berry Farm is much, much cheaper than Disneyland.
Oh, yeah.
But those are two different animals. So I ended up taking Cheryl to Knott's Berry Farm for the first time a few years back.
Yes. Been about 4 or 5 years.
Something like that.
Something like that.
And what was your experience?
I liked it. It was unique. It was different. I mean, definitely different than Disneyland. Yeah, other than that, some of the rides were cool.
What was your favorite?
I'd have to say, I think it was the train ride. I can't remember the name of it.
Calico Mine Ride?
Yes, that was my favorite.
So we will be talking about that ride today and the developer of that ride.
Okay.
And what was your least favorite? I know you weren't very impressed with the log ride.
It wasn't bad. It was just, I think because you're just going by so fast, you couldn't really see the displays and stuff around you. I mean, it wasn't bad. But of course, Robert had to put me right in front.
Of course.
Not funny. I was soaked. And I think that was the first ride we went on, so I was soaked. Especially my shoes for most of the day.
Well, that's where any newbie gets to ride, is in the front. You should be happy I did not take you on the Bigfoot Rapids ride. That would have gotten you soaked.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in this episode, we're not going to talk too much about the Knott's family history or Walter and Cordelia Knotts and how they developed Knott's Berry Farm. That is for another podcast. But in this podcast, we're going to talk about the 4 artists and developers, designers that helped Walter Knott create what is now Knott's Berry Farm.
Cool.
If it wasn't for them, Knott's Berry Farm would not be what it is today. So we're going to talk about a wood carving specialist, a sculptor, a portrait artist, and a ride designer. So those are the 4 gentlemen we're going to talk about. Before we do that, I do need to talk a little bit about Walter and Cordelia Knott and how Knott's Berry Farm got started. Like I said, there's a whole nother podcast about Walter and Cordelia Knott that we can talk about from their beginnings all the way up until their passing. For today, we're going to talk about from the Chicken Dinner Restaurant on.
Okay.
Because the Chicken Dinner Restaurant is where this whole story kind of takes off. You have not been to the Chicken Dinner Restaurant yet.
No, we were going to, but I think they were too busy, and the line was pretty long, or there was something, then we weren't able to go. So, no, I did not have the chance to partake and try.
And when the funny thing is me growing up there, I still haven't been there. And I grew up down there. So Walter and Cordelia Knott were children of California pioneers. They survived on love, faith of God, honesty, hard work, commitment, and a no-quit attitude. They fought from one hardship to another, from the unforgiving Mojave Desert, poverty, failure, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars, to accidentally create an empire. They had no grand plan drawn out, no main vision, no huge dream to own a restaurant, not to mention a historically themed amusement park, where Walter Knott utilized reality and replication to transport guests back to the Old West and out of their current reality, if only for a moment in time, making Walter and Cordelia Knott true California pioneers in their own right. Cordelia unknowingly created the foundation that became Knott's Berry Place, which then would become Knott's Berry Farm and the ghost town that Walter Knott created. Cordelia came up with a short-term solution during the Great Depression to get people to come in, and Walter stated it had become obvious that just pie, coffee, hot rolls, berries, jam, and sandwiches were not going to be enough to draw people in from out of town. Why he said that was because before Cordelia created the chicken dinner, she had a tea room. And that tea room is going to be important here in a minute. So in that tea room, she would serve, like I just said, jams and berries and sandwiches and little cakes and little bakery items. And so she would serve all that kind of stuff in this little tea room. The little tea room, in June of 1934, Cordelia fried some local chickens and served up 8 guests dinner on her wedding china for 65 cents a person.
Jeez.
Now get this. This is 65 cents a person. The meal consisted of fried chicken with rhubarb sauce, hot biscuit, vegetables, mashed potatoes and gravy, and a berry pie with ice cream for dessert.
Wow, that's a lot.
All that for 65 cents. This same meal is still served to this day, the exact meal. And from what I understand, when I was doing research for my thesis paper, which a lot of this information is coming from my thesis paper that I wrote when I was getting my history degree. But as I was doing the research for this, I was watching interviews of women who worked with Cordelia, and they were saying that she was a very strong woman, a very strict woman, but very loving. What they meant by that was she ran her kitchen very, very well. It was a well-oiled machine. You didn't go out of your place in her kitchen, is what I'm trying to say. She ran that kitchen kind of like an army, I guess, but everybody respected her. She wasn't mean about it, nothing like that. She was very loving, but at the end of the day, she knew exactly how she wanted these dinners to come out, and they were going to all come out the same exact way every single time.
Right.
The dinner that you get today in the restaurant is the same exact dinner that was served in 1934. And what I was saying is, Cordelia, she didn't want this to be a permanent thing. She did not want to start a restaurant, and so she proclaimed to Walter many different times, I'm not going into the restaurant business. And that's a funny thing for her to say. She's not going to the restaurant business. So she served, what I said, 8 guests that very first day. So the next day, a few more people showed up and arrived for dinner. And in a few weeks, the Knotts were expanding the tea room. More and more people now have heard about Cordelia's chicken dinner, and they're now showing up. So her plans of not starting the restaurant are starting to starting to fade here. So Cordelia served her dinners in a 20 by 20 foot tea room, as like I said, containing 5 tables that sat 20 people at a time. So lines began to form. See, this is where the ghost town is going to start coming in, as these lines forming outside for this chicken dinner. So lines began to form, waiting for their turn to partake in Cordelia's chicken dinner. So in 1936, additional rooms were built on to accommodate 70 guests. So they went from 20 up to 70 at this point. But the lines grew even longer outside. By 1937, the waiting line for the restaurant were so long that Walter would go outside at the front door of the chicken dinner restaurant area and look north down Grand Avenue and not be able to see the end of the line.
Wow.
So in 1937, the Knotts expanded the tea room once again to seat 330 people.
Wow.
And then built on a large kitchen with funds from selling berries at the berry farm.
Okay.
And so at this point, this is a whole nother thing I don't want to get into right now, but just about the time that she started the chicken dinner restaurant, his boysenberries were beginning to take off.
Okay.
And so the boysenberries are what is paying for these expansions.
All right. They must have been doing pretty good to pay for the expansions.
And so the whole boysenberry story is a whole nother podcast in itself as well. But I have to mention it here that that's how they're able to pay for these expansions, is by the selling of these boysenberries.
Okay.
Because Walter couldn't get a loan from the local banks. So they kind of had to shift some funds around and move some things around. And when I was doing the research for my paper, there's actually a funny story that Walter Knott went to the local bank to get a loan to be able to expand the restaurant. And the banker told him, well, we can't give you a loan at this time. It's just not possible. And so what Walter did, like I said, is he saved up the money by selling the berries and built on and got that expansion. But the funny part part of that story was, as Walter was walking down the line, the waiting line for people to get into the restaurant, who do you think he finds in line? The banker.
Oh.
So the banker's waiting in line, and he tries to sweet talk Walter Knott, and Walter just like looks at him and says, "Enjoy the line," basically.
Yeah. If you had given me the money, you may not be waiting.
So on Thanksgiving Day in 1937, the Knox family served 1,774 dinners.
Wow.
355 pies. Oh boy, get this. 8,890 biscuits.
Wow.
Only a year later, in 1938, the Knox had expanded once again to 600 seats. Today, the restaurant can serve 2,000 people.
Wow.
Even though the restaurant continued to grow, so did the waiting lines as well. So as World War II began, there were some days where, unfortunately, the Knox family had to turn people away in the waiting lines because of food rations.
Yeah, I was thinking food rations.
Right. You know, the people understood, and they would come back another time when the food rations weren't happening. And they never spoke a bad word about the Knox because of it.
Well, they had no choice. I mean, it was a government thing.
Right. No, exactly.
Everyone had to do it.
So waiting in line outside the chicken dinner restaurant could take up to 3 hours or more at some point in time.
Wow.
So Walter hated this. He hated to see these people waiting in line that long and had to do something about it. And so to entertain the guests, Walter begins with creating attractions for people to look at or go check out while waiting in line. You've been to some of these attractions. I think I've pointed them out to you.
Yes.
They're meant to draw impressions of a time gone by, because Walter Knott was not just a farmer, a horticulturalist, an arborer. He was also a historian as well. History was a passion in his life, and he grew up listening to stories from his mother telling about her traveling from the east to the west on the wagon train into California. She was 3 years old when she was on the wagon train.
Wow.
And that story is going to come back up here in a minute as well. But he grew up listening to all these stories. And so his love of history grew from his mother. And unfortunately, I believe his dad passed away at a young age. He was a minister in Pasadena. So back to our story. In 1938, Walter ordered 15 tons of volcanic rock from Death Valley to create a rock garden in a lath house on the west side of the Berry Farm, or the Berry Market. And you've seen that.
Yeah.
And in that rock garden, he created a waterfall, and that waterfall is still flowing. And if I remember correctly, it's really humid in there. And it's all enclosed now. Inside of that rock garden, he put in ferns and colored lights to light up the fountain. And like I said, hidden within is the waterfall. And it was all powered by an old pump from a tractor. And I'm sure that they've replaced all of that now.
Oh, yeah.
It's been so long. So in a year, Walter then added a millstone. There was also a sign that he posted there by the millstone that encouraged guests to sing down by the old mill stream. To complete that room, Walter also recreated George Washington's fireplace at Mount Vernon.
Which I do remember seeing that, yes.
Because he was impressed, like I said, with the history, with American history, Western history. So the fireplace was the first attraction to express his patriotism for the United States.
Okay.
There'll be another one coming on a little later. You probably already know what it is. And one of our 4 artists has something to do with the second one as well. So at the same time, just north of the restaurant, and it's still there today actually, Walter added another relaxing habitat for visitors to go check out and enjoy instead of having to wait in line. It was on the alkaline bed of an old dairy farm and a community dump for tin cans and unburnable items. So the items that he couldn't burn in tin cans, this was an old dump.
Okay.
And it was an old dairy farm that he turned into an old dump. So Walter dug out a massive hole in the center of this thing and filled it in with trash and covered it over, which made an island surrounded by a lake. So this old dump pile, he created an island and then created a lake around this old dump pile.
Okay.
And so now that island that you see out there today is the old trash dump.
Okay.
And there's no access to the island. Even today, you can't walk out onto the island. And so out on the island, Walter placed a small lighthouse surrounded by volcanic rock. Some more of that volcanic rock that he got from Death Valley. And then around the edge, Walter then planted trees and shrubbery and created a walking path around the lake. So with the expansion of the restaurant in 1939, there was a small problem. While guests were eating in the restaurant and looking out the window, there was an unsightly pipe out there that Walter Knott didn't want people to be looking at. It was a 12-foot high cement pipe. That's not a very attractive thing to be looking at while you're having dinner.
Right.
And so what Walter ended up doing was taking some more of that volcanic rock he got from Death Valley and created a volcano.
Okay.
That volcano no longer exists, unfortunately. It was a 12-foot volcano. Around it was all the volcanic rock, and at the top was a small automatically controlled boiler that was hidden that would add steam, the steam effect of the volcano.
Oh, okay.
And then at the base of it stood a little stone house where there's a little guy spinning
Oh, okay.
a little wheel. And it's kind of cool. There's a picture of it, actually. The little guy was named Old Nick. So Old Nick would turn this little crank. And occasionally the volcano was activated and it would blow some steam and it would have the erupting sound to it.
Okay.
And the effects of the lights and the sound and the steam made it all look like this volcano was erupting. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So there are other things that he had out there for guests to look at as well. He had a 15 million year old petrified log, a giant redwood slab, and Russell Knott, which Russell is his son. Russell Knott had a collection of fluorescent rocks in a 14 by 14 foot black room.
Okay.
And I've seen a lot of those fluorescent rocks before. Those are really cool. They have some down in Red Bluff at the rock shop down there. And so then Walter also purchased an 80-year-old stagecoach, rumored to have been one of the stagecoaches that Black Bart robbed.
Oh.
Which would be really interesting. Now, Black Bart, that's a whole nother story.
Oh, yeah.
We can get into him as well. And no, it's not the Black Bart from the Seven Seas pirate guy. This is the Gentleman Bandit, Black Bart. So with the success of the chicken dinner restaurant and the berry sales, the Knotts paid off their land and were able to purchase even more land. So you got to remember that when he started this berry farm, he started off with just a small piece of land. And he gradually built on buying more and more land as he went, as he could afford it. So the Knotts began to create a good life for themselves once and for all. Like I said, before this, they basically lived in poverty and hardship. That Mojave Desert story, I didn't tell you, but they lived out in Mojave Desert. They homesteaded out in the Mojave Desert.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that.
Yeah, and they failed at, Walter failed at growing grapes out there because of Mother Nature. And so it was just one hardship after another for the Knotts family. So now, after the Great Depression, now the family is starting to get some money and some land, and life is starting to look good for them, which is opposite of the Disney story. You have Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm, which are relatively close together as a bird flies, but they're two different stories altogether.
Right.
Where Walter Knott was the farmer and tree planter, Walt Disney was an artist.
Right.
And a visionary. And so they were two different stories. I'm not saying Walt Disney didn't have it rough or have it hard. He did. But I don't think he had as hard as Walter and Cordelia Knott. And Walt Disney's going to come up again here in a little bit. So now we're in 1939, 1940. Chicken Dinner Restaurant has taken off. These lines are absolutely insane. Walter Knott has created George Washington's fireplace, the volcano, petrified petrified log, redwood.
The lake, the little
lake.
pond with waterfall.
Right.
Yeah.
He doesn't stop there. So at this point, the Knotts are both in their 50s. And so at 50 years old, he then decides, well, I got to keep going with this.
But I do have a question, because with the lines, were the people standing in line given like a number so they could go walk around the lake and see all these other things? It's like, I wonder how that worked.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because if they got out of line, they would be out of they'd be giving up their space to be next. So yeah, were they given numbers and then their number was, yelled out, and then they would go in and have their dinner and leave?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's just something I thought about. It's just like, yeah, it's nice that he has all these little attractions that they can walk around, but if they got out of place of line, did they give up their place in line?
Right. Or did one family member have to stay there in line while the others...
No, little Johnny, you can't see the volcano. It sucks for you.
Stand in line.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa.
Too damn bad.
You keep standing.
You grow up, you're going to be standing in more lines. Yeah, I don't know, actually. It's a good question. And that's actually a good time to bring this up. Cedar Fairs now owns Knott's Berry Farm. Is no longer owned by the Knott's family. Mm-hmm. And actually, Six Flags is now just merged with them, with Cedar Fair. And so now Knott's Berry Farm is going to be part of the Six Flags organization.
Okay.
Which I'm kind of worried about a little bit.
Did that just happen?
Yeah, that just happened.
Oh, okay.
Which kind of worries me a little bit, but it is what it is. When Cedar Fairs took over, there was a bunch of buildings at Knott's Berry Farm that had a huge amount of artifacts in it from the Knott's family, from Knott's Berry Farm. And a lot of those artifacts have been sent over to the Orange County Archives. So the Orange County Archives has all this stuff from Knott's Berry Farm. I would love to go through it and check it out.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. The answer to your question may sit there in the archives.
Maybe, yeah. Who knows?
I don't know. So, like I said, Knotts are now in their 50s. They reevaluated their lives and looked back from where they came from. Like I was saying, they came from some hard times. Mm-hmm. With thoughts of the past, Walter wanted to pay tribute to his pioneering spirit, his mother's pioneering spirit, his grandmother's pioneering spirit. Mm-hmm. And wanted to pay honor and tribute to that. Beginning in 1940, Walter started building what would become Ghost Town today.
Okay.
And he created it with buildings that were real Ghost Town buildings from around western states. A lot of these buildings that are in Ghost Town today were actual real buildings from western ghost towns.
Okay.
Not all of them.
Not all of them,
but a lot of them. And the ones that aren't real are replications of existing buildings that are out there.
Okay.
And we'll talk about one of those here in a little bit. That's actually kind of a funny story to it. So the ones that they created were ones that either they couldn't find or weren't available to them. Mm-hmm. And so the first building Walter placed on the farm was the Old Junction Hotel, built in 1868, later renamed the Old Trails Hotel by Walter. He purchased the hotel in the old west town of Prescott, Arizona. Inside the hotel, Walter would place a 3-minute show to honor his grandmother, Rosamond Doherty, and his mother of 3 years old, crossing the desert from Texas to California in a covered wagon. The show was titled The Covered Wagon Show, which consisted of a large silorama, which was a 20 by 50 foot curved painting with a built-in foreground of a wagon train, complete with colored lights that made the scenery go from day to night and night to day. And it had a recording for this 3-minute show, like a soundtrack, telling the story of the heroic wagon trail pioneers. And the last part of the recording was something that I will never forget. And I've seen this show many, many times as a kid. In the last part, there is a little girl that says, "Mommy, I want a drink of water." And you could just hear the angst in that child's voice. Whoever the child was that recorded it did an amazing job. And I believe that's the words that she said, but it's something to that effect. It's, "Mommy, I want a drink of water," or, "Mommy, I'm thirsty, I want a drink of water." But the angst in her voice made you just feel like, oh, I want to give this child a drink of water, you know?
Right.
And there's no child there. This is just this.
Right, just recording.
Yeah, it's just a recording. So the rumor is that the words that little girl uttered were words that his mother, at 3 years old, said to her mother on the wagon train.
Wow.
Which makes it even more haunting.
Right.
So how he got the idea of building this was in 1915, Cordelia and Walter took a trip to the World's Fair in San Francisco where they saw a silorama, and it impressed him so much that Walter never forgot about it. And so he wanted to include that as one of the attractions in the ghost town. So this covered wagon show inside of the old hotel was the very first attraction in Ghost Town.
Oh, okay.
If you want to think about the building of Ghost Town, the hotel was the very first thing inside of Ghost Town. And that show lasted up until the 1990s.
Wow.
To this day, I believe that the canvas is still in storage and it's not out on display anywhere. But there may be parts of it on display in the museum.
Yeah.
Or inside. I believe it's now a shop of some sort, and there may be some little things from the show inside the shop. And so this is where our first artist comes in. So Walter had a artist by the name of Fritz Zillig commissioned to paint the silorama, and he was working on it for about a year and wasn't getting anywhere. And so Walter's like, "Yeah, you're done. You're out."
Yeah.
So Walt would then hire a well-known Austrian artist, Paul von Kleben, and Paul would finish the silorama very quickly, very, very quickly, within a very short period of time. Actually, finished the entire project in a very short amount of time. So Paul was born on March 17th, 1891 in Germany, and he would then pass away on June 14th, 1953 in Sonora, California. He arrived in America in 1914 and started living and working as a portrait artist in the Chicago, Illinois area. And around 1917, and became a United States citizen on February 11th, 1927. In 1935, Paul would then come to Los Angeles and later live in Topanga Canyon and then Carlsbad, California. He was an accomplished portrait artist who would do portraits of Hollywood actors and actresses and famous people of the time, people like Will Rogers and Edsel Ford. However, he was displeased with the Hollywood type atmosphere that the actors and actresses were generating. This kind of snootiness.
Right. He didn't like the vibe.
So yeah, he didn't like the vibe of that. So when Fritz didn't work out, Walter Knott reached out to Paul and said, "Would you come down and take over this project?" So he did, and not only did he finish that project quickly, precisely, and effectively, Walter Knott was so impressed with Paul as an artist that he made him a staff artist from 1943 to 1953, and his artwork is still throughout the park today. He did brochures, menus, maps, murals on the walls, paintings, you name it. Paul was involved in doing all of the artwork for Knott's Berry Farm at the time. So as I spoke earlier, in the archives, Orange County Archives, a lot of Paul's work can be seen probably in those archive files. Walter Knott gave him exclusive rights to sell his artwork on the farm.
Oh, okay.
Paul lived and worked on Knott's Berry Farm property.
Huh.
So not only did he work there, he actually
He
lived
there.
on property. And he had a studio there. It was at the end of Ghost Town, and it was an adobe building that he used as a studio. It was constructed by Walter Knott, and they constructed the adobe bricks there on property. And the building today, most likely, is the entrance to the Spears Restaurant. And I know you don't know where that's at, but the Spears Restaurant, there's an entrance, there is an adobe entrance, and more than likely that is Paul's old studio.
Okay.
So after Paul had finished the Covered Wagon show in just a few weeks, he then turned to working hand in hand with Walter Knott on traveling around the country looking for old buildings and artifacts to be able to fill Ghost Town.
Okay.
They're known to travel to the desert and grab whatever they can find out there. Anywhere from ore carts, wagon wheels, borax wagons, buggies, or whatever was left out in the desert that was Old West-ish like, they would grab and then bring back to Ghost Town and display it there. So some of the other buildings that they hauled back to Boettner Park was the old schoolhouse that you have seen there from Kansas. That was Walter and Paul, their brainchild. They found that old schoolhouse and brought it back, and it still had the lesson of the day on the chalkboard when they brought it back. Multiple buildings from the Mother Lode here in California, the Gold Country, the log cabin from the Midwestern states, the blacksmith shop is original.
Okay.
And the saloon is original as well. What was not original, like I said, was recreated as close as they could with old wood that they've salvaged over the years. One example was the Judge Roy Bean's Lily Saloon in Texas, which was copied in every detail from the original saloon. They couldn't purchase the original one, so they copied it exactly as the real saloon.
Wow.
And the replication was so well done that there was a young couple who had just got back from Texas, and they went through that old saloon in Texas, and Walter Knott overheard them talking about the reproduction there in the farm, and their exact words were, "I don't see how they got that building out here so fast. We just came from there in Texas and went through it." All Walter Knott could do was smile.
Yeah.
He didn't want to give up the secret and ruin these people's impression.
Right.
They thought he brought that building from Texas, in the last couple of days. Another reproduction building that had a huge impact was that of the post office, and that was a reproduction done by Paul as well. It was so well done that the U.S. Postal Service commissioned Ghost Town as an official town. It was an active post office.
Wow.
And as a kid, you go through there, you could actually mail a postcard or a letter from that post office because it was a real post office. Now, the Boot Hill Cemetery, Walter and Paul would go out to actual cemeteries and find real headstones from these cemeteries and bring them back. So the headstones that you see in the Ghost Town Cemetery are real headstones.
Oh, okay.
And which ones are not real, they are reproductions of real ones as close as they can get. And you're probably wondering to yourself, so they're just out taking headstones? No, what they did was they would go to whoever was running the cemetery and ask them if they could purchase these headstones, and in return, Walter Knott would replace them with a brand new headstone that looked exactly like it.
Oh, okay.
So they would take the old ones and Walter Knott would just replace it with a new one. So then Walter and Paul would also create the gold mine experience. And this is where guests could pan for gold. And the thing about it was they could pan for real gold. It wasn't pyrite. Walter personally saw to it that there was $10,000 worth of gold in that.
Wow.
And so when you were panning for gold, you were panning for actual real gold.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. And then in 1947, Walter Knott and Paul purchased a Butterfield stagecoach. And that is the stagecoach that runs around the park that you can get on and ride around.
Yeah, which we did.
Which we did. I was very crammed inside. Very crammed. You know, and that's the first time I'd ever rode inside.
Oh, really?
I always rode on top.
Oh.
Yeah, I always got lucky and was able to ride on top. So what's so impressive about Paul van Cleben is even though Walter Knott was the one who created Ghost Town and the idea of Ghost Town, it was Paul who designed it.
Right.
So Paul designed the entire ghost town that you see today. So as you're walking through Ghost Town and you see all the buildings, Paul was the main person who designed everything there, where the buildings are going to go, stuff like that.
Okay.
Walter Knott, he had his ideas as well. I mean, he brought his ideas into it, but it was Paul who basically designed it. He drew out everything. As you're watching the movie, and they always do storyboards. Paul was doing storyboards on how Ghost Town was going to look.
Okay.
And so I'm wondering if those hand-drawn storyboards are in the archives as well. That'd be really interesting. The Knoxbury Farm Ghost Town is not the only ghost town that Paul van Cleben is responsible for designing and constructing. In 1951, Walter Knott purchased the real-life town of Calico, California. It was a silver mining town in San Bernardino County out in the desert, where at one time back in the 19-teens, Walter Knott actually worked while he was out homesteading out in the Mojave Desert. And at one point, I believe his uncle used to own one of the silver mines there in Calico. Walter Knott quickly put Paul van Cleben right to work on redesigning and reconstructing the old mining town of Calico back to its former glory. And you can still go out there today and actually camp out there and see what Paul and Walter Knott created. They didn't redo all the buildings, but they did do a lot, and it's very Knoxbury Farm looking. You can definitely see Walter Knott's and Paul van Cleven's influence in Calico today. That's definitely a place you need to go and check out. So this next part about Paul is the one that gets to me, because this is the one that I remember the most. Is after he was done with the Covered Wagon Show, he went right to work on a new project. It was a new idea that he had that he presented to Walter. In 1941, Cleben created the Transfiguration of Christ. And what that was it was a painting that he did of Jesus Christ that would accompany some music and a little narrative. And at one point, as the lights went down, these doors would open and you would see this picture of Jesus Christ, and then his eyes would open.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Walter Knott, being the religious man that he was, absolutely loved it. So Walter Knott would build an adobe chapel that held 50 people by the lake to house this painting.
Well,
like I said, by lighting effects and a transcribed narrative of the Christ makes this thing just an amazing piece of artwork. And seeing it in person, even as a kid, you're thinking, okay, this is going to be a boring thing. It was actually really kind of a cool thing to see. And back in the day, in the 70s, they would hand out this little paper version of the painting of the Christ. And it was a glow-in-the-dark deal.
oh, okay.
And so when you opened it up, it had like saloon doors as a folded up. So as you opened it up and you put it under light, the eyes would glow
Oh, wow. Okay.
at nighttime or in the dark. I still have mine.
Oh, wait. Okay.
It's actually sitting here in one of my photo albums. It is really, really cool. So you're thinking that, Walter Knott being a religious man, that he absolutely loved this transformation of Christ and the adobe chapel. That was not the only chapel on property. Walter Knott and Paul actually found a real chapel in the city of Downey that was going to be demolished. It was built in 1876, but Walter Knott and Paul were able to save it.
Okay.
And they brought it back to the farm, but they couldn't do it all in one piece. They had to take the steeple off and bring it back in pieces, but they reconstructed it near the lake and put the steeple back on. And not only did they bring the church back to the farm with them, they brought the minister that ran the church.
Oh, okay.
Walter Knott offered him a job
Being
as
able to...
the minister.
Okay.
And it was a working chapel.
Oh.
Walter Knott and his family attended church there every Sunday. So it wasn't just a prop for Ghost Town.
Right.
It was an actual working chapel. And like I said, that was placed there at the Lake of Reflection there on the farm. Just to finish up with Paul van Cleben, his body of work includes a number of portraits of actors and actresses, people of of notable familiarity in society. They're mostly in private collections now, but there are a number of paintings, like I said, at Knott's Berry Farm, even to this day, that are still there, along with private collection pieces in the Knox family and pieces from Knott's Berry Farm that are in private collections as well. So his huge painting, Saturday Night in Old Calico, 1888, which it wasn't painted in 1888, it was just the title of it, which originally hung behind the bar at the Calico Saloon, now hangs in one of the galleries there at the farm. There are paintings of the berry fields that are still hanging there at the farm. They're hanging in Virginia's gift shop. So if you go into Virginia's gift shop, the paintings up there of the berry fields are Paul's. He also painted a mural that is in the Ghost Town Grill, and 2 large portraits that are in the Western Trails Museum. There's actually a painting of the landscape of Ghost Town inside the Chicken Dinner restaurant.
Oh, okay.
As well. So that was Paul Van Cleben. He was one of the more influential artists out of the 4 when it comes to creating the ghost town that we all know and love today, and that everybody has known and loved. Now, the next person on our list is Claude Bell. And Claude Bell was born October 5th, 1896, and passed away in 1988. You would know Claude Bell very, very well. Claude Bell was the sculptor of the 4 gentlemen we're going to talk about today. And you know Claude Bell as the sculptor of Handsome Brady and Whiskey Bill.
Okay.
And the Saloon Girls.
Oh, yeah.
And so for those of you who are not familiar with who I'm talking about, inside Ghost Town, there are 2 benches that you can sit at and take pictures with these 4 individuals. One bench has Handsome Brady and Whiskey Bill, and the other bench has 2 saloon girls. They're stone statues or concrete statues that Claude Bell created for Walter Knott. So Claude Bell grew up in Bridgeton, Cumberland, New Jersey, where his father Joseph Bell was a glass blower and worked at the local glass factory. When Claude Bell was about 12 years old, the family moved to Atlantic City and lived with his uncle. The reason why they moved to Atlantic City was because of health reasons. It was on advice from the family doctor. While in Atlantic City, Claude would sculpt statues in the sand along the boardwalk. One day he went back to retrieve his jacket that he left, and he found it full of coins. In that day, he made more money than his father did in 1 month working in the factory. After serving in the infantry tending mules, he then decided he was going to travel the fair circuit from the East Coast to the West Coast with a handful of portrait artists. He ended up in Long Beach, California, where he opened a stand at New Pike there in Long Beach, where Walter Knott was introduced to Claude by Walter's son-in-law. Walter Knott at the time was looking for somebody that could create some statues as well as entertain the crowds waiting in line for that infamous chicken dinner. So Handsome Brady and Whiskey Bill and the Saloon Girls were all created in 1947, along with and I don't know what year he was created, so I haven't been able to find a year, but there is also the miner with the mule that sat outside of Knott's Berry Farm on the corner of La Palma and Beach Boulevard. It was up on a stand, and it was a miner and a mule. And so that was Claude Bell's creation as well at Knott's Berry Farm. And Claude Bell, like Paul Van Cleben, worked there at the park. He had a studio at the park as well, and he was sculpting. He had a portrait studio, which is now the Rock and Geode Shop.
Okay.
So if you go to Knott's Berry Farm, you go to the Rock and Geo Shop. That was once Claude Bell's studio, portrait studio. And some of his work actually is still in that rock shop as well. So any of the sculptures that you see around Knott's Berry Farm, more than likely Claude Bell created those. And so this is where I'm going to talk about the other patriotic attraction that Walter built, or talk a little bit about it. Walter recreated the Independence Hall from Philadelphia. And that's outside of the park. You can go there for free, check that out, all you want, doesn't cost a thing. In front of Independence Hall is a statue of a Minuteman. That is a Claude Bell sculpture, is the Minuteman in front of Independence Hall. So you would know Claude Bell, not only for Whiskey Bill and Handsome Brady, but he's also the gentleman who created Mr. Rex and Diney, the dinosaurs at Cabazon, California.
Oh, okay.
You've been there as well. And for those of you who don't know, on the 10 freeway or Interstate 10, on the way to Palm Springs, there's a little area called Cabazon that has two big dinosaurs. And one is named Diney, and the other is Mr. Rex, who's a T-Rex. Claude Bell created, I believe he created Diney starting in 1964. And Claude Bell owned 60 acres in Cabazon, and he created these dinosaurs on his property. So the property that the dinosaurs are sitting on was Claude Bell's property.
Wow.
So the reason why he created those dinosaurs was to attract business to the Wheel Inn diner.
Right.
That was his.
Okay.
He created the Wheel Inn diner, and so to attract business, he created
The dinosaur.
Diney. In 1964 is when he started. He didn't finish him until a little bit later, but he then, once he finished him, he then started on Mr. Rex in the 1980s. So you're probably wondering to yourself, how did he come up with two dinosaurs to put out in front of this restaurant? It goes back way back when he was a kid. So as a kid, he visited Lucy, which was a large elephant sculpture in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and was so inspired by it that he built Diney and Rex. He died at 91 years old, so he was working on Mr. Rex in his 90s, late 80s and 90s.
Jeez.
And these dinosaurs are a metal frame with concrete, so the interior of them are hollow.
Right.
And so there's a shop, I believe, in one of the dinosaurs. And for those of you who are Pee Wee Herman lovers, you would know the dinosaur from Pee Wee Herman is Mr. Rex.
Mm-hmm. And when you go there, you tell them Large Marge sent you.
Yeah. And what's funny is the Wheel Inn restaurant no longer is there. They tore it down. But if you want to see what it looked like, watch Pee Wee Herman.
Yep.
He filmed in the restaurant there. That Large Marge scene was there in the restaurant. And there are quite a few videos on YouTube from people like Adam the Woo or Justin Scard from Random Land who were able to get into the abandoned restaurant before they tore it down. So there are videos of the abandoned restaurant before it got torn down. Go check those out. But what's cool is in front of, or at the front door of the restaurant, there was a miner that Claude Bell created as well.
Okay.
Going back to the Knox Berry Farm days, I'm just wondering if this miner guy just never made it into the park and he just decided to put him in front of his restaurant.
Yeah, who knows?
You never know. But he was there. And you could also see the diner and the dinosaurs in a Tear for Fears music video.
Oh, yeah.
They filmed out there as
Yeah.
well. And so it's a very popular stopping point.
It's actually pretty cool. It really is.
So where he got the materials to build Diney were leftover materials from Interstate 10 being built.
Wow.
Highway 99 ran right through Cabazon before Interstate 10 ever existed. But while Interstate 10 was being built, there was a huge flood at one point that destroyed all the rebar and steel that was being used for the new freeway overpass. It was all twisted and they couldn't use it, so they ended up selling it to Claude Bell, who in turn would use it for the construction of Diney, the dinosaur. Claude was going to bend the rebar and steel anyway, so half his job was already done by that storm. Diney is 45 foot high and 150 feet long. And like I said, Mr. Rex was built in the 80s, a little bit later on, and I-10 had already been there for a while. And I'm wondering if I-10, and I don't know for a fact, but maybe somebody else may know, but I'm wondering if I-10 through Cabazon was the old Highway 99. Because I know the old Highway 99 runs through there.
Yeah, you never know.
I just don't know if it ran where Interstate 10 is now, or if it ran to the left or right. Because I know in Beaumont, which is just 10 miles up the road, Highway 99 ran through Beaumont. Mm-hmm. It didn't run up the freeway that exists today. It ran through town. And so the interesting thing about Claude Bell, when he passed away in Orange County, and he is buried at the Rose Hill Memorial Park in Whittier. So the next gentleman we're going to talk about was also buried at Rose Hill Memorial Park in Whittier.
Okay.
Which I found really interesting. Mm-hmm. But before we get to him, because he is one of the most important artists that Walter Knott hires, is our next gentleman, I want to do a quick glance on another gentleman that you're probably wondering why I haven't spoken of him yet. You're probably thinking to yourself, what about Sad-Eye Joe?
I was thinking that. I'm like, what who created Sad-Eye Joe?
Yeah, are we going to talk about Sad-Eye Joe? So for those of you who don't know, Sad-Eye Joe is a wood-carved figure who got put in jail in 1941 and has remained in jail ever since.
Yep.
And you can go up and talk to Sad-Eye Joe and he'll talk to you. And if you visit him more than once, more than likely he will remember you. Mm-hmm. So you never know.
I remember when we went there, and I actually made him laugh because he asked how I was, and I said, finer than a frog's hair. He started laughing. And I told him that, we had come from Reading to try to break him out because, people want to try to get Sad-Eye Joe out of jail. And, my plan was to get him out that night, and I told him to be ready, but he wasn't ready. So he's still there. I don't know what to tell you.
He was snoring when we went back.
That's true. Yeah, he was. So he must like it.
So the gentleman who created Sad-Eye Joe was a gentleman by the name of Andy Anderson. He created actually all of the wood-carved figures at Knoxbury Farm. In Knoxbury Farm, they have what is called peek-ins. Yeah. And it's a wire cage over the window, and you peek in.
Peek in, yeah.
For a time, Cedar Fair's removed all of the peek-in characters from the buildings. And I don't know if they've replaced them. I think they may have replaced them, but they removed them and put live characters there instead. Except for Sad-Eye Joe. They never replaced Sad-Eye Joe. But they had a Chinaman in the laundry. They had the barber and a guy getting shaved at the barber shop. And there's a few others I can't think of off the top of my head. Rumor has it that Walt Disney was so impressed with Anderson's hand-carved figures at Knoxbury Farm that he took that idea to the Imagineers at Disney Studios, where they invented animatronics and gave us Abraham Lincoln and the pirates from the Pirates of the Caribbean. So technically, if this rumor is true, if it wasn't for Sad-Eye Joe, we wouldn't have Abraham Lincoln or the pirates on the Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland. But all those wood-carved individuals were created by Andy Anderson, who was born in 1892 on October 7th and passed away in 1960. He was the son of Swedish immigrants that, once again, he was living in Chicago as well, and came out to California in the late 30s, which a lot of people were traveling around the United States in the 30s because World War II, the Great Depression. Yeah. Looking for work. And like I said, he created Sad-Eye Joe in 1941. So that is who created.
Okay, yeah, because I was wondering, I wonder who created Sad-Eye Joe.
Right.
And he does look sad. But
and he's held up pretty good.
He has.
For as long as he's been in there. He's a horse thief.
Yep. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, Robert, you were telling me that, the parents would have the kids walk down that little alleyway to go see Sad-Eye Joe, and, one of the parents would tell the person who does the voice the kid's name. So when the kids would walk up, Sad-Eye Joe would be calling them by name.
You just ruined the magic, Cheryl.
Well, it's adults listening to it. I doubt kids are listening to this.
There's some adults that still believe.
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah,
You just ruined the magic.
I kind of doubt that some adults believe that. Good Lord.
What are you telling me? Sad-Eye Joe's not real?
He's not real.
Well, son of a gun. I don't know, man. All right. Well, moving on. Now that you've ruined my childhood. The last artist we're going to talk about, this one's going to resonate with you because this has to do with the Calico Mine Ride. This has to do with the nut tree in Vacaville.
Oh, okay.
As well.
Okay.
Cheryl is kind of sort of from Vacaville. She grew up in Vacaville as a kid, so this will resonate with her as well when it comes to that. It was a gentleman by the name of Wendell Bud Hurlbut. He just went by Bud. And he was born on June 13th, 1918 in South Dakota and just passed away not too long ago in 2011.
Okay.
On January 5th. 2011. He's also the other gentleman that's buried up at Rose Hill Memorial Park in Whittier.
Okay.
He was born in Watertown, South Dakota, and he was an only child. And the family moved to Whittier, California, where Bud worked as a printing apprentice in a printing company, and then as a patent maker for a aircraft supply company. He was a mechanical engineer for an engineering company in Whittier, California as well, which got him into creating amusement park attractions.
Okay.
So this is a gentleman who stepped into Walter Knott's life that transformed the Chicken Dinner Restaurant and Ghost Town into an amusement park that we all know and love today. If it wasn't for this gentleman, I don't know where Knott's Berry Farm would be today.
Okay.
I don't know if the success that they had would have carried over into the 90s and 2000s.
Right.
If it's just a chicken dinner restaurant
Yeah.
and a old ghost town.
Right.
But Bud Hurlbut is the gentleman who made this happen. So Bud Hurlbut's amusement park experience began with designing and building old railroads that people could ride. Little railroads that people can ride. So he had 12 trains that he built and designed. One of them was in his own little kiddie park in El Monte. It was in the parking lot of the Crawfords Market where Bud had his little amusement area. And he had one of his trains that kids could ride. So another one of his trains was operated in the Pike in Long Beach, California. And then he designed and replicated an 1880s train that ran up in Santa's Village in San Bernardino for a period
I've been
of time.
to Santa's Village. Yeah, I remember that. My parents, we went with some cousins back early 80s, or maybe probably late 70s, because I wasn't that old, so probably late 70s we went there. I do remember it.
So that little train that ran around Santa's Village that you probably rode on
yeah.
is a Bud Hurlbut train. That train now is in the Santa Ana Zoo.
Oh.
Very close, actually, within 4 or 5 blocks of where my cousin Janet lives.
Oh, okay.
So Santa Ana Zoo now has the Santa Village train. And then he also built the train for the nut tree
Yeah.
that would take visitors from the Nut Tree Airport over to the restaurant.
Right. Right.
So that was a Bud Hurlbut train as
Okay.
well. And I believe he also designed, did they have rides at the Nut Tree?
Not
Like kid rides?
Not when I was there. I think they were just starting to do like the pumpkin patches and stuff. Because we only lived in Vacaville for maybe 4 years, so I don't remember any rides. I just remember going to the pumpkin patch.
Well, I think I remember reading something about some rides being there or something.
They are now. There's a carousel.
Oh,
there
okay.
now, but that
sounds familiar then.
Yeah.
So I believe that the carousel was probably brought in by Bud Hurlbut. Him being the ride designer and amusement park designer, he would have been the one to bring in those rides. And seeing that he only passed away in 2011.
Okay, yeah, because
that
they completely redid that whole area with big shops and the carousel. So I would imagine he had his hands in that.
Well, I'm sure he did. So then another one of his trains in 1938 is in operation at Adventure City, which is part of Hobby City Complex in Anaheim. He has another one in North Carolina, and then one in Phoenix, Arizona, and then another one at Castle Park in Riverside, which was actually his amusement park after he left Knott's Berry Farm. He opened up his own park called Castle Park in Riverside, where he had one of his trains there. So the thing about Bud is he was a lover, obviously, of the trains. Walt Disney, lover of trains. Walter Knott, obviously the lover of trains as well. And Walt Disney and Walter Knott were friends. I'm not going to say they were best friends, good friends. They were acquaintances. But Bud Hurlbut and Walt Disney were buddies. So I think Walt Disney used to come over to Knott's Berry Farm to see what Bud Hurlbut was up to before he built Disneyland.
Oh, okay.
And even after he built Disneyland, Walt Disney would come over to visit Bud Hurlbut over at Knott's Berry Farm as well. That's going to come into play here in a moment when we talk about the Calico Mine Ride. Now, here's the thing. Walter Knott did not want rides in his park. So Bud Hurlbut came to Walter Knott with an idea of a carousel. He had a old carousel he wanted to bring in the Knott's Berry Farm. And Walter Knott did not want rides in the park. Walter Knott's son Russell talked to Bud Hurlbut, and those two together went to Walt and talked Walt into placing an 1896 carousel on the property. It was 50 foot in diameter, and Walter Knott paced out 50 feet. He didn't measure with a tape measure, nothing like that. He paced it out with his heel to toe. And so this is where you guys can set your carousel, as long as none of my trees are damaged.
Yeah.
So he showed them where they could put it. And that was the thing, is that Walter Knott had a contract with Bud Hurlbut. It was a handshake contract, nothing in writing. It was just word of mouth handshake that Bud could put in the carousel. Bud would get the profits from it. And then he would pay Walter Knott rent for being able to have it there on property.
Okay.
You'll see that as a running theme here. That's why I wanted to bring that up. And so Bud Hurlbut, this is a direct quote from the research I did. The merry-go-round had a 50-foot diameter, but he didn't use artifacts of surveying. He just paced out the distance using his toe and marked the ground. Mr. Knox said, "Here's where you'll put the center pole." And like I said, he wanted where there were no trees. So the second thing, after the carousel got put in, Bud was thinking about putting in a automobile car ride. So in 1958, Bud once again goes to Walter Knott wanting to put in the car ride. He goes, "I got an idea for a little car ride," and he said that it would be okay if no trees were removed or damaged. So he had to weave the tracks around the existing trees.
Oh, wow.
It was known as the Antique Auto Ride, later renamed Tijuana Taxi. And I actually have pictures of my little cousin Corey riding that ride in the 1980s.
Wow.
So then in 1959, he began operations of the small train around Knox Lagoon. So there used to be a small train that ran around the little lagoon there.
Okay.
And that was, once again, another Bud Hurlbut design. So now here is where Bud Hurlbut takes the ride attraction and jumps up a million notches. There are two rides that he designs, creates, and builds with his own money. First one, the Calico Mine Ride. The second is the Timber Mountain Log Ride, which are right across from each other.
Right.
So the Mine Ride opened in 1960. It's an open-air train ride, trains once again, that takes guests through a gold mining experience to show them how hard rock mining was done during the gold rush. At one point, guests are able to see a massive glory hole where workers are working, pulling out gold from the ground. Colored lights, steam, and real mining artifacts, along with sound effects, made the whole experience more realistic. Did you feel that?
Oh, yeah, that's why I love that ride. It's just like I could go on it 3 or 4 times. and I'm still in awe every time. It's so cool.
The ride was constructed in a 6-story building, complete with an underground river, waterfalls, and mine train tracks on 3 levels. So Bud Hurlbut had to sell his ranch, his house, his brand new Cadillac just to be able to fund this project.
Wow.
To be able to build the mine ride.
Jeez. That's dedication.
Oh, yeah. And then partway through construction, he was beginning to run out of funds. And so he went to Walter Knott and explained that to him. Walter Knott asked him, well, you know what you're doing, right? Bud replied, exact words here, yeah, sure. He then said, I never lied to Mr. Knott again. So Walter Knott allowed Hurlbut to suspend his rent payments and also agreed to pay for a promotional film about the ride. And so Bud Hurlbut was able to complete the construction, and the Calico Mine Ride became an instant hit. Mm-hmm. And it still is to this day.
Yeah.
Now, this is a story about Walt Disney I wanted to tell you that I thought was really funny. Like I said, Walt Disney would come to the park every now and then. There are photographs of Walt sitting, I believe, with the Saloon Girls. It was either the Saloon Girls or it's Whiskey Bill, one of the two, but he's sitting there with the statues. So Walt Disney goes to Knott's Berry Farm, gets in line to ride the mine ride with Bud Hurlbut, and comes around the corner and realizes the line's a lot longer than he thought it was. Bud had tricked him. And so Walt's words to Bud were, you sneaky SOB. Why he was a little upset was because what Bud Hurlbut did was he created an illusion that the line to the beginning of the ride wasn't as long as you thought it was. Until you turn the corner and see, oh, I have much further to go.
Right.
And so Walt Disney took that experience and put it in Disneyland.
Okay.
So when you go to Disneyland and you stand in line and you turn the corner and you see the line still going,
yeah,
that came from Bud Hurlbut and Knott's Berry Farm.
Okay.
There's other things that are in Disneyland that Walter had taken from Knott's Berry Farm. Mm-hmm. So he was going over there kind of, I guess, spying a little bit.
Right.
And seeing what Walter Knott was doing with these artists. And he took that back to his Imagineers and said, hey, we need to incorporate this into Disneyland.
Right.
So I thought that's kind of cool. Now, the second ride was the log ride. And that was built in 1968. Walt Disney, I believe, had passed on by that point, so he never got to see the log ride. But that, like I said, was across the street from the mine ride. And if you don't know what the log ride is, it is a flume water ride which takes you through a logging camp. It has 2 drops in it. There is no track whatsoever. Mm-hmm. It's a free-floating log, no track, no nothing. But what was cool about it is the log ride was the first ride to use a mat to be able to get the log up the hill.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So the log would go onto this rubber mat, and the rubber mat would haul the log up to the top of the hill. And that was the first time anybody had ever done that.
Right.
So he impressed a lot of people with that engineering of coming up with that. And of course, like Cheryl said, that last drop's the doozy.
Yeah.
You sit up front, you're going to get wet.
It's not that I didn't like the ride. It's just that the water is going so fast that you really aren't able to look at the scenery and what's going on because it goes by so fast. That's the only thing that it's a little disappointing.
And the fact that there's no tracks there, so they can't slow it down.
Right.
I mean, they could probably slow down the flow of the water, maybe.
But yeah, I don't know.
I don't know about that. So interesting history on the log ride. Walter Knott and Bud Hurlbut were the first 2 to test ride the ride a few times before it opened. And the very first official rider to ever ride
Ooh, I think I know.
the log ride is who?
John Wayne.
Yes.
Okay. And his son.
And his son.
And his son. Okay.
Yes. And there's actually quite a few pictures of John Wayne and his son coming down the hill.
Right.
And so they were the very first 2 to ride, and then Walter and Cordelia were the second to ride after John Wayne and his son, and the ride actually broke down.
Oh, jeez.
But it was no fault of the ride or anything else. There was actually a power outage in Boettner Park.
Oh, man.
At the time.
Okay, yeah. So
So Walter and Cordelia got stuck on the ride. And I believe Cordelia, I think I may have it here. So Construction took over a year and cost more than $2.5 million of Bud Hurlbut's own money.
Wow.
But like I said, he opened up the mine ride in the 60s. He had 8 years of profits to be able to save up money to do this one. Cordelia said she would never ride the ride. And then she went ahead and rode it anyway, being the second 2 people to ride it, and then it breaks down.
Because of the power outage.
Because of the power outage. So Cordelia probably had some insight into maybe she shouldn't be on this thing. So, as I said earlier, Walter Knott's biggest pride and joy of anything, even bigger than Ghost Town itself, was the construction of Independence Hall. He wanted this thing to be perfect. So he sent artists over to Philadelphia. They measured every inch of the original Independence Hall, came back and recreated inch by inch Independence Hall.
Wow.
And how Bud Hurlbut relates to this is Bud wanted to give a gift to Walt, and so he created the Liberty Bell crack and everything.
Oh, okay.
And at the end of the day, all said and done, Bud had created an exact replica of the Liberty Bell up to 5 pounds to the original weight.
Wow.
He was 5 pounds either off or over from the original weight.
Wow.
That is incredible.
That is incredible.
And so if you go into Independence Hall and you see the Liberty Bell, that is a Bud Hurlbut build. And he's not done yet. He's not done with just the mine ride, the log ride, the carousel, Tijuana taxi. What he also ends up doing is they opened up Fiesta Village. And because Walter's kids, Russell and Virginia, and one other daughter, I can't think of her name, we need to create a whole nother park area. Let's make it Fiesta Village. We'll celebrate the Mexican heritage of California, and Walter was all for that. He actually had 21 missions built, models of the 21 missions. He built the El Camino Real that goes into Fiesta Village. I don't think it's there anymore. I think they may have taken it out. I know they took out all the models, all 21 mission models, but they've brought a couple of them back, and those couple are sitting in the park. But I don't know if El Camino Real is still there or not. That'd be interesting to find out. All the older rides in Fiesta Village are Bud Hurlbut rides, like the teacups.
Oh, okay.
One of your favorites.
Yeah, no.
So the teacups are Bud Hurlbut design. Not so much just the fact that the teacups, he didn't design teacups, but he did design the artwork and the design of the teacup with the sombrero and all that. So that was pretty cool. So then, like I said, he then leaves Knott's Berry Farm and opens up his own amusement park in Riverside, which was Castle Park. He opens that up in 1979. It's a 25-acre hobby park. And it was filled with a mini golf course, an arcade, and then the train. So that's pretty cool. And then one of the most impressive things that not a whole lot of people probably even know is that Bud Hurlbut was the one who created Knott's Scary Farm.
Oh, okay.
And so much so that he even, in the first few years, would dress up in an ape costume and hide inside the Calico Mine Ride and scare people.
Oh, that's funny.
I know you haven't been to Knott's Scary Farm.
No, I want to one of these days. So, I mean, actually lately, I've been really kind of craving to go down there, go to Disneyland and go to Knott's Berry Farm and do all that. It's been how many years? Over 10 years? Well, for Knott's, for us was 5, but Disneyland it's been more.
It's probably been more than 5 years now. I don't know. I don't remember. Well, Knott's Scary Farm now has over 1,000 monsters. So it's pretty cool. So that's one of the things that I saw that I didn't know, that he was the one to create Knott's Scary Farm. And Knott's Scary Farm is the most successful special event of any amusement park in the United States.
Huh. I mean, I've seen videos and it looks pretty neat,
So that is pretty much our 4 artists that helped Walter Knott create what you see today at Knott's Berry Farm. And with Cedar Fairs owning and now Six Flags owning Knott's Berry Farm, obviously it is not what it was when I was a child, and it never will be. But at least they haven't messed with Ghost Town too awful much.
Right.
And it is coming the Christmas season, and so there are going to be some Christmas vendors around Ghost Town. I have my mixed feelings about that. I think we went, they had...
It was around Thanksgiving.
Yeah, they had Christmas vendors in Ghost Town. Mm-hmm. And the thing I didn't like about it was that the Christmas vendors were kind of blocking the view of a lot of the historic buildings in old Ghost Town.
Right.
And that's the part I didn't like. But on the other hand, it goes hand in hand with the Walter Knott theme of having independent artists there on property selling their goods.
Yeah.
Just like these 4 artists had their pieces of art being sold inside the property. And Bud Hurlbut, I take his attractions as a piece of art. And if you've not seen the Calico Mine Ride or the Log Ride, that is a piece of art. Yeah. It really is. It's incredible.
But also, if listeners out there, if you've never been to Knott's Berry Farm and you do go, there is one thing that you do have to look for around the Old Town section. Do you even remember what that is?
I have an idea.
It's the catawampus.
Yes.
You have to find the catawampus. And you're thinking, what the heck is a catawampus? Robert?
See, that's part of the allure. Is you don't know what the catawampus is.
Yeah.
Until you get there, and then you have to ask somebody, have you seen the catawampus? And then they may or may not point you in the right direction.
Yeah, you never know. And I think they change it, too.
Yeah,
if I'm not
I think
mistaken.
I think they do. So if you guys want to hear a full story on Walter and Cordelia Knott, let me know. I will do a full background story on those two. Like I said, very, very interesting life. Very heartwarming and humbling, heartbreaking story of these two individuals. A farmer and his wife living in the Mojave Desert and then traveling from there to San Luis Obispo and then to Buena Park and creating an empire. So like I said, if you want to hear that story, let me know, and we will do that one as well. But for now, hopefully you enjoyed this episode in learning about the 4 artists that helped create what you know today as Knott's Berry Farm. I think without these 4 artists, it wouldn't be what it is today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So if you've never been, you need to go. You need to have the chicken dinner, and you also need to either buy some jam or you need to have a piece of boysenberry pie.
Well, that's another thing. I could do a whole nother podcast on the boysenberry, history of the boysenberry, and how that came about and why Walter Knott is
who he is today
with boysenberries.
Yep.
That's a whole nother one as well. So for right now, we're going to leave it there. Thank you for joining us, and go out and be good humans, and we will see you on the next episode.
And I hope you have a very good day.
Oh, Lord. I thought you were going to say, I hope you have a berry Christmas.
No, I never thought of that. I could have.
Well, we're going to do a couple more episodes before it becomes Christmas, so
okay.
You can stick with Berry Good Day.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Till the next time.